So I would like to record this session. If you object, then please raise your virtual hand now. No objections to recording? Great, then we're going to proceed. So yes, welcome to this first session to our course CS492 section G about foundation and future of virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and massively multi-user online role-playing games, MMORPGs. As you may have seen and recall from session 0, if you like, the introduction and motivation video on YouTube and on KLMS. The reason we're conducting this course is because people tend to focus on the technological and application aspects of this technologies of VR, AI, and MMORPGs, but tend to forget about the background and the foundations, which is understandable in the heat of the excitement. But for example, people like to speak a lot about AI, artificial intelligence, without really knowing what intelligence is, right? Because researchers in education and pedagogy have spent decades exploring the question, what is intelligence? And I'm not sure whether they have found a definite answer. This is something we hopefully will learn in the second chapter of this course. Similarly, everybody likes to speak about virtual reality, but what is reality after all? That's something, for example, philosophers have explored not only for decades, but for centuries. So today we're going to start with a presentation by student Gang Do-hyun about the philosophy of reality and virtual reality. So thank you very much, Gang Do-hyun, for preparing this. And now I'm going to give you the permission to share screen and yeah, unmute yourself.
Okay. Hello, I am Gang Do-hyun, as Professor had introduced. I am going to introduce the philosophy of reality, whatever philosophy of reality is, that is. So, oh yes. When we talk philosophy, how should I say this? There is a very thin demarcation between what we can call it as a professional philosophy or just pop philosophy. And of course, to question what is philosophy, which is a branch of an academic itself, would make up another branch of academy, just like the philosophy of science, as philosophy of science asks, what is science? As just like it, philosophy as a word is such a vague thing. Philosophy as an academic is also a vague thing. But as far as I can tell, at least these things, these common characteristics that I have shown you, is something that I think as unprofessional academic philosophy. Instead of just anyone pondering about who am I, what is the world, etc., etc. Yes, academic philosophy is, of course, learning of previous thoughts made upon the world, such as there is a journal of Nietzsche, there is a journal of who was it? Wittgenstein, so on and so on. And these qualification of previous thoughts, or maybe even contemporary thoughts, is a somewhat systemic and sound structure of thoughts regarding whatever its topic regarding our world and humanity is about. And of course, the beginning of these structures are always questions. Another thing is that there is no such thing as a divine answer in this philosophy. Of course, you can side up with one philosopher or side up with a branch of philosophers who follow a tradition of certain system which tries to explain our world, but that does not make the system or philosopher qualified as a divine answer for any question he tries to answer it. And finally, of course, what should be a question after all? So, when I first thought of philosophy of reality, I tried to demarcate the question into these two types at first, of course. So, when we commonly think about reality for a small amount of time, when you try to ponder it inside your mind, there are these types of thinkings. Is this actual? Or is this deceived? Is this false? Viewing on this point, truth and false, am I seeing what I am seeing, or is this just an illusion after all? Is focusing upon the structure of truth. So, as I have written in the example line, is this world perception or sensation? Reality, if you call it, or etc., any other words, not a deception. And this is linked into logic, or something we call as logic, true and false. Another line of thoughts that can come out from questioning reality would be to question the structure of existence. So when we make some question marks or any sentence at all, there is always a subject, verb, object, sort and sort. I don't do grammar that much, so forgive me if I am wrong. But anyway, anyhow, there are some things that is in the essence of the sentence. And these things, we think they are real. So what is it to be real? What is existence? That is another question that comes to mind. And so I tried to talk about these questions at first, so the truth and the existence, but they are too much. There is too many things that I should cover up if I am to talk about all of these questions covered in philosophy, the history of philosophy. And in short time and my non-academic backgrounds, such would be impossible. So I'm going to just present to you two examples which seems to answer the question of reality in some sort of manner, but there are still questions that can be raised from that systems. And this slide that I am showing you was a reminiscence of my past plan, but still I thought this was useful. Because the two philosophers that I'm going to introduce to you now is focusing upon the structure. So originally I was going to contrast the structure and construction. And on the one side, I was going to show you the philosophers who thought they were examining the structure of reality. And on the other side, the philosophers who thought they were constructing the reality by starting from the beginning. Of course, there are very vague distinctions between what is a construction of a definition or a measurement of a structure. Yes, still. And as I have said, that plan did not work out as well. So for now, I think this would be useful to keep in mind when you see the two philosophers that I'm going to introduce to you. There is there, or some sort of a system preceding or independent from perception, mind, and consciousness? Because when we say the structure of truth, not the construction of truth, we are implying that there is a certain system that is original, apart from humane errors. The same can be given to the existence as well. Structure of existence. Is there something alien from us? Is this something, a definition that is without us thinking it? This is something that, of course, philosophers tried to answer but never answered. So, and there are tons of researches and traditions regarding each of the questions that I've posted here. There is an analytic tradition in the English speaking countries regarding that logic is a structure that is apart from us. But no, it is not. Some says the logic is just a humane creation. Sort of it goes on and on. If you have interest, do search up for these questions. Anyway, anyhow, the focus of our presentation now moves on to Eastern philosophy. And as I have said, I'm going to only introduce to you two philosophers in Central. So even though I have said Eastern philosophy, I'm going to focus on Taoism, and more specifically, the philosophy of Taoism, and inside it, the Zhangzhou or Zhangzi. And yet, as Zhangzi is marked as a Taoism philosopher, and he himself is very much influenced by such tradition of thoughts, I need to introduce to you this philosopher as well. Laozi, which is in Chinese direct translation, an old man. He said that there is a universal law, a universal thing called Tao and De. So Tao in Chinese character, it means the road, and the character looks like that, but it is very improper, at least in my thought, to make any translations into English language as just a one sentence word. So before Taoism, or at least before Taoism got popular, there was no such vivid contradictions or criticisms against something called Confucianism. Most of the Korean students would have been familiar with Confucianism, but for others who may not be, the Confucianism focuses on ethical codes and values. The most vivid example would be there are 4-character length Chinese anecdotes made by Confucius, who was the master of Confucianism. They goes on like this: have friendship with your brothers. Always be loyal. If you're whether or not you are a lord or on someone who is serving the Lord, be loyal to each other. And there must always be a love foot and some sort of unification between wife and the husband, so on and so on. That is what Confucianism focused on. How to be a good man, how to be ideal human in this society. But as you can see, this Laozi contradicted this ethical codes and values, almost saying that they are just not. Could lose from knowledge and your worries will be not. What difference is between being polite and rude? What difference is between good and evil? This is from the Tao Te Chang, as I have cited here, the most significant book in Taoism. And you can see that his thought of universe, that it is constructed upon the Tao and De from chapter 51. Tao gave birth to all, De nurtured that everything. So everything is shaped as such, and the flow of force is made. As you can see, this tradition of Taoism is somewhat a mixture of cynicism and a system trying to explain the universe. And that is why Taoism itself is, in some ways, no, not in some ways, there is a religion called Taoism as well, apart from the philosophy of Taoism. And this is the philosopher that we have in mind, Zhang Zi. He said, as an addition to this universal law of Tao, there is a universal Qi, the formation of beings and scattering of beings, life and death. It is all movement of Qi coming together and falling apart. And he have left very famous anecdotes in his book, also called Zhang Zi. The story of monkeys, the story of wife's funeral, and the drum with dish, and of course, the story of butterfly. Sorry for showing you a comic line with Korean embedded on it, but there was no appropriate image that I can find for this anecdote except this comic, which is, even though you cannot read Korean, monkeys were once angry at this man, but as this man turns away, monkeys then says, "We're good with it." Of course, this comic is a parody of the anecdote itself. The anecdote goes on as such. There was a man feeding an apes, monkeys, and once he said that, for your meal today, I am going to give you 3 nuts for morning and 4 nuts for afternoon. The monkeys then went wild. They enraged. They didn't like it. They wanted more in the morning. So the feeder then said, "Oh, so if you say so, then I'll give you 4 in the morning and 3 in the evening." The monkeys were then happy and they went on with it. There is a mixed interpretation regarding this anecdote itself, and there is another line of meaning when used in just common conversations in Eastern culture. Anyhow, the line that anecdote was inside regards that we are very short-sighted. Human beings are very short-sighted. There is someone who thinks he is right. There is someone who thinks he is wrong. When we make a discussion or a debate between each other, we often say that, oh, that is more plausible, that is more reasonable. But how can you say that it is plausible if there is only two that is deciding what is good and what is wrong? Just like the monkeys, We might say this is better than this, but is there an actual difference between the two when you see it in the universal way? Can you actually say that I am correct when you say something that you believe is correct? Even though anyone who can affirm it is just human. The second one, the story of wife's funeral and drumming with a dish, is also related with the first one to crumble down our traditional thoughts about human ethics or human values. The story goes on like this. This story is also written in the Zhangzhou book. There was a very admirable wife of Zhangzhou, and she died of oldness and illness. And when Zhangzhou's close friend went on to find Zhangzhou's house, he found Zhangzhou singing and making a drum bit out of that dish. The friend then said, "What are you doing? This is too absurd for you. This is too inhumane." Then Zhangzhou said, "I was once very sorrowful, as everyone else did, because I departed my wife. But then I just came to think about what death actually is. And then it suddenly came to me, life and death is just like the four seasons rotating. The keys come together and made life for my wife. And when my wife died, keys fell apart. It is just what it is. And I should not be sorrowful for things to being as things are, but rather to enjoy them, rather to bless them. That is why I am beating with my dish." I introduced to you these two rather famous anecdotes by Zhang Zi because I thought this would make up some background information of his philosophical thought. The main point that we are going to talk today is the story of butterfly, which I will move on after introducing to you some more of his works. So this book, Zhangzhou, is, I believe, the first 3 volumes are written by Zhangzhou himself, and other volumes, called the outside volumes, are written by his friends or his fellows, his pupils. The story of wife and the drum bit was in the outside part, and the story of monkeys were in the inside, the second volume. Anyway, anyhow. So the second volume goes on like this. I do not know if exists or not. I not know whether what I spoke is actually exists spoken or the spoken is not. Yes, this is very complicated, but the reason I have written this, you cannot see the point. Chinese characters upon the original line, the translated line, is because in Chinese characters, there is one character showing or representing or believed to be representing existence. And another character is thought to be representing not. Wait a minute. Let me see if this is possible. Yes, here it is. This is a character that is supposed to mean exist. There is whatever it is. This is supposed to mean not, nothing, zero sometimes. And in this part of his book, he is talking about the word not itself. I haven't copied everything or translated everything because it was too long, but if I am allowed to say it shortly, is there not before the word not? Is there exist before the word exist? That is why he said that exist or not, exist or not. And because this language is so fragile, I do believe that exist is existing and not is not, and using this particular character as exist and this particular character as not. They do not, I do not know, Zhangzi did not know whether this spoken thing is actual or not. This is getting already complicated, but to be short, he is questioning whether our words are enough to believe in, or is ideas that our words representing enough to believe in. And this distrust upon word itself is also well shown in this second part. Alongside chapter 1, chapter 2 has an quotation like this. Tao, as we have seen in the earlier slides, had no distinction, and words had no fixed meanings. And before this quotation, there was a lengthy part regarding how our words made up, or our ideas made up distinctions between things. And thus, referring to the previous words he have written, by giving meaning to the words, distinctions were made. Originally, there was no such thing as a distinction. But because we made distinctions with our ideas, we marked them with our words, we distinguished them just as we think that this is existence and this is not. We made something up. The first 3 chapters of volume 2, or maybe it was 4, was about Zhang Zhou talking these complicated stuff regarding human mind, human ideas, how they are just in vain, how we believe such things that is supposed to be unbelievable, so on and so on. The chapter 5 and chapter 6 is somewhat like a fairy tale. How may I know why such things happen? How may I know why such things not happen if it does not happen? The interesting part is that the one answering here is the shadow. And the one asked to the shadow is penumbra. The question penumbra has made to the shadow was like this. When I saw you last time, you were standing still. But this time, I now see you moving and dwindling. Why are you doing that so? Of course, scientists have the answer. No, not just scientists, the kindergartners have the answer as well. Light makes the shadow, and shadow there is somewhere behind penumbras, so on and so on, but shadow replies as such. I do not know. Is there something that makes me move? Is it light that actually makes me move? Then is there anything that makes light move? It does not specifically say light, but in our vision. And if there is something that makes light move, just as we learn in physics, there is a mixture of crossing of electric fields and magnetic fields, so on and so on. Is there something that makes that move? And does that also have something that makes them move? How do I know that? How may I know why such things happen? How may I know why such things not happen? And just after this line, this Zhang Zhou, the second volume, ends with the dream butterfly. cannot know whether Zhou, this is Zhang Zhou in short, was dreaming butterfly or butterfly dreaming as Zhou. Between Zhou and the butterfly, there must exist a difference, and such shall be the change and becoming of things. So this butterfly, the chapter of butterfly begins like this. Once Zhou was dreaming, and he was flying so lovely as a butterfly. He had no concerns. He was very much ample with pleasure. He had fulfillment as a butterfly. And then he woke up and he was Zhou again. Then came these parts. Cannot know whether Zhou was dreaming of a butterfly or butterfly dreaming as Zhou. Between Zhou and the butterfly, there must exist a difference. Because we think Zhou and the butterfly is different, and such shall be the change and becoming of things. But reflecting upon the previous thoughts of Zhang Zhou that I have introduced to you, can we say butterfly and Zhang Zhou is actually different? Is there actually a distinction? Well, there is a distinction in words, of course. Let's see. Can know Zhou is probably Zhang Zhou. Was dreaming of a butterfly. We denote with characters Zhang Zhou and butterfly, but can we say they're different? We perceive things are different. Of course, this is my hand, this is my glass, this is my earphone. I have my voice. Voice also has a character, so on and so on. Is there a distinction between them? The thing is, does questioning really matter at all? We say virtual reality. Virtual, made up, or something that is not a real thing. What is the difference? Should it be a difference? Should there be a distinction between something we call virtual and artificial? We think this Zoom meeting is, of course, not a virtual reality. Virtual reality is something that Metaverse and every other IT corporations are doing, so blah, blah, blah. But it is so. Is it so? I am seeing your face via Zoom, via some Wi-Fi network, via somethings. But how can you tell that you're seeing me inside this small box at a presentation? Is this real? Or does it matter? That is something to think about. We simply say artificial intelligence, virtual reality, so on and so on, just as Professor said, without thinking about what reality is or intelligence is. Well, why can we not say this Zoom meeting is virtual reality? What distinguishes virtual from actual? Is there any distinctions needed after all? Moving on to our familiar Western side, apart from that complicated Eastern side. Of course, Descartes, the most prominent the most popular, probably the most popular figure in Western philosophy. Unless you have learned it in podcast, radio, TV programs, or just daily talking, or in school, you have heard of cogito ergo sum in some ways. Of course, if you have not heard it in Latin, then in English or anywhere in your country's words, I think therefore I am. And he was a heavily religious man. I'm not going to delve deep into his system of philosophies because there's a clear distinction in his philosophy. There is logic applied to the soul, and there is logic applied to the body in the system, philosophical system of Descartes. So this is drawn by Descartes himself. He thought this part in our brains link our soul and our body. And by such, we see, we perceive, we point, so on and so on. So when you see the complete work of Descartes, there are very different characteristics of writings. A series of writings regards something we call metaphysical, something that is not about material stuffs, but about pure reasoning or our souls, so on and so on. On the other hand, although he is mostly distincted as a philosopher, it seems he was heavily inside the science part. In that time, it was called natural philosophy, especially in biology. There was a series of exchange between this man and I remember it was Father Mersenne or other philosophers, natural philosophers of that era, regarding how hearts work. He says, I remember it vividly reading it, when you put your finger inside an eel's heart, you can feel this heart's volume being expanded and stretched, so on and so on. And with this observation, he proposed some theory regarding our heart. Now, what does it have to do with his philosophy? This means he saw our body and soul in a completely different manner. He saw these things are merely material if without souls controlling them. And that's why he has studied animals, which is also just material things, just like an automata, just like a clock who is supposed to do precisely what it's supposed to do. And he thought learning animals would help us learn about our body as well. And if we are to learn about our souls, which is of course linked with our body, but not our body, as we can see in this drawing, then we need another type of thinkings. And these thinkings, of course, it is somewhat in shallow form, is the meditations. Yes, it was virtually impossible to just summarize meditations into a few lines, so I just copy and pasted some parts that I thought that was most important. So the meditations goes on in this structure. Of course, as I have shown you, the first one is to question. Am I seeing what I am seeing? I have learned from my senses what I am seeing, what I am feeling, what I am talking, what I am hearing. But sometimes they have proven me very wrong, and it is unnatural to believe something that you were once deceived in. So he begins his system of thoughts, reaching unto something that he can actually believe in. He is setting up a course to actual meditation. The first part that I highlight is this part, and this part will come into play again when I introduce to you another thing that is related with Descartes. Anyway, anyhow. But they are mad, and I should not be any less insane were I to follow examples so extravagant. And before this, the examples were madmen. Men thinking they're wearing a king's robe when they're actually wearing nothing. A man who thinks he is dwelling in a sea of gold while he was actually just a poor. But after saying that he is not a madman, and I am not delusioned as such, he goes on to say, but hold on, I can still have some delirices. I must remember that I am a man, and that consequently, I am in the habit of sleeping, and in my dreams representing to myself the same things, or sometimes even less probable things, than do those who are insane in their waking moments. He then goes on to think like this. Although I am very, very religious, and I believe in God, he does not actually say this in paper, but let us think that there is no God. There is no someone who is infinitely good, infinitely powerful, infinitely everything, but some evil genius, so powerful and deceitful, has employed his everything in deceiving me. And because my senses can be delusioned, and I have just hypothesized that this devil exists and is deceiving me, I shall consider heaven, earth, colors, figures, sound, and all other external things are not but illusions and dreams which this genius hath made himself in order to lay traps for my credulity. This is the starting point of his meditations. He is now skeptical of our sensory stuffs, of our ideas coming from external worlds. This is an extension of the first part, of course. I pause to consider. I revolve all these things in my mind, and I find none of which I can say that it pertains to me. But there is something that remains even if I cut out everything that seems to be deceitful. Mode of thinking. I find here that thought is an attribute that belongs to me. It is not external, not like wax in the candle, not like the hot feeling that the wax gives, not like this light. It is not external. It alone cannot be separated from me. I exist, and this is certain. Then what am I? A thinking animal. But by the understanding only, and yes, example like wax, I see clearly that there is nothing which is easier for me to know than my mind. He is still lingering upon the hypothesis that this external world is a deception. He reached one conclusion, in this meditation at least. That is, the famous cogito ergo sum in Latin, but not exactly phrased as such. I exist, that is certain. And although I have not written it here, he goes on to say, then what am I? A thinking animal. Then he now ponders upon mental things. In the starting point of this third meditation, he goes on to say, I now close my eyes, I now shut my ears, I stop feeling these warm feelings, so on and so on. I am going to dive deeper into my mental thinkings. But among these ideas, some appear to me to be innate, some advantageous, and others to be formed or invented by my mind through my ideas coming to me. And this, the others on the later part, formed or invented by myself, just like the idea of heat. The idea of a stone cannot exist in me unless it has been placed within me by some cause, which possesses within it at least as much reality as that which I conceive to exist in the heat or the stone. These are external. And after all, just like the idea of heat or the idea of stones, he goes on to erase the ideas that seems to be outside of his mind, that cannot be derived by himself, or any ideas that is coming out of self, just like I think, therefore I am. He excludes these ideas, and then there remains this in Descartes' thought. There remains only the idea of God, which we must consider it is something which cannot have proceeded from me myself, just as the previous thoughts were erased by Descartes. He's reasoning that God's idea is not from him himself, nor the externality, because God is infinite, is as following. Since I am a substance, or at least I think I am a substance, I should not have the idea of an infinite substance because I am finite. If I had not proceeded from some substance which was surely infinite. Nor should I imagine this infinity by a negation of finiteness, because negation of finiteness surely cannot reach the infiniteness that I have in mind. This is not just a negation of something, for example, negation of heat, we think of coolness. But infinite is not like the negation of finite. Therefore, this thought was bestowed to me by God. He, the omnipotent, the everything, is undeniable, because I have in my mind the thought of this omnipotent, and this is certainly cannot be derived by myself or from any other externalities, which is of course finite. Yet this idea is infinite. Then who gives this? An infinite thing. And what is an infinite thing? The God. There are 3 other chapters of meditations going on to 4th meditation, 5th meditation, 6th meditations, and these are all built upon God. How can I assure that my sensations are real? That there is no such thing as a devil who is trying to deceive me? Well, God is. God gave me these gifts of acknowledging him. And surely God cannot have been so deceitful for me, because God is good. As I have said, he is very religious. And this is why I'm going to cut the part of meditations here. Later part is first, I cannot fully accept that because it is too religious. I am interested in theology, but not a religious man. Secondly, its logics are a little bit less sound than the first previous parts. And surely it is not needed in my question and matter about reality. Oh, I forgot this. Yes, from this it is manifest. He cannot be a deceiver. Of course he is. Since the light of nature teaches us that fraud and deception necessarily proceed from some defect, and God is defectless because he is infinite. This is the reasoning of Descartes, but yes, let's recall how he denied this specter, this evil men trying to deceive him. He now cuts out something that can be deceived. He focuses on to his mental activities, to his ideas. He cuts out any external things and distinguishes between his own thoughts and something that must be innate, something that is given from existence. Something that has came from himself is de cogito ergo sum. Something that came from the other side is of God. The idea of God, of infinite goodness, everything. But as I have said, this meditation is built upon a structure. And the part we are going to focus on is the first part in this first meditation. He is setting up a course of mental activities, which presumably for him led inevitably to the God and to himself, the existence. But this part is something that was a focus of debate between two philosophers. But they are mad, and I should not be any less insane were I to follow examples so extravagant. I am going to introduce to you the debate between Foucault and Derrida. They are both French philosophers in the modern times. Derrida was a pupil, a student of Foucault, and was in close relation just before this debate happened. Derrida was living until I believe 2000 and something, and he did have some fame, but most of the philosophers, especially in the English side, did not like him. Michel Foucault is a philosopher who is undeniably one of the most prominent figures in modern philosophy. He died at a somewhat early age because of AIDS, and he had left many writings about history and history of power, history of politics, political philosophy, and philosophy of words. And most of the times, these things are all mashed up into one thing. Anyhow, this is what they have debated. The thing that I've just read you. Does Descartes include or expunge in his development of meditations the madness? So, as I have said, Michel Foucault wrote a book called The French Line, because there are two types of translations in English. One is called Madness and Civilization. I do not know where civilization came from in that French original title, but anyway, most of the times it is published as Madness and Civilization. On the other hand, there is a direct translation of the French title called History of Madness. I do not know French that well, but still, madman who is irrational, history of madmans in the age of, this is called classic, but most of the times it is translated as an age of enlightenment or age of reason. So in this book in 1961, he goes on deeply into both historical sources regarding the hospitals or some cathedrals which once held madmen into their custody for both locking them up and to cure them. Some philosophical writings regarding madmen and some cultural flows which is related with the concept of madness. Anyhow, this is the part where Derrida finds Foucault to be wrong. This is the comment of Foucault on this very part. We can assume that we are dreaming and identify with the subject dreaming to find some reason to doubt. As I have shown you in the first meditations, although he says, might be dreaming, and this can be wrong, but still there is something that I can assure. He is talking about that part. The truth still appears as a condition of the possibility of the dream. We cannot, on the other hand, suppose even by thought that one is mad, because madness is precisely the condition of the impossibility of thought. But they are mad, and I should not be less insane were I to follow examples so extravagant. In the original book, this citation is just shorted to a sentence, but they are mad.
Can I briefly interrupt and ask about your schedule, your time? I think the 50 minutes, 40 to 50 minutes are now up. How long would you?
Then I will finish it quickly, yes.
Okay.
So yeah, I was going to introduce some back and forth of Derrida and Foucault regarding this particular passage, but anyway, anyhow, I'll just skip this since it is actually a capture because I cannot find any PDFs of their talkings, and I can surely not transcribe this all. You can search for Cogito and the History of Madness as in English if you're interested in their debates. And yes, this is the question. The painting on the left is also introduced by Foucault as madness in European culture, drawn by Rembrandt, I remember, called The Ship of Fools or Ship of Madmen. Well, this raises some valid question. Or is it valid question or not? Does questioning reality valid if we are to actually doubt our mind everything? We normally think, just like Descartes, there might be someone who is deceiving me. Our sense can be derailed. Our mind is so fragile. But have you ever thought, or we mad? We think our cognitive functions can lead to certain logical thoughts. But can we do so if we are mad? And if we are mad, why not? We think about, just as Descartes did, some evil genius who is trying to deceive me. Why not believe I am mad? Then what happens? What happens to the question of reality? Have we ever questioned ourselves before questioning about reality? This is something that I wanted to present regarding philosophy of reality. And this is the end of my presentation or anything I have prepared, so thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. So let's give an applause, maybe virtual applause. Yeah, very interesting. Could you perhaps try to summarize or recall a brief overview of what you have talked about? So it was 50 minutes presentation, and maybe what are some of the key issues that we should take away, take home? Could you summarize that briefly? Thank you.
So when I first thought about this presentation, I was going to introduce many philosophers and many systems of thoughts regarding truth and existence. As some of you may know, there is even a philosopher who tried to answer the question of being itself by delving deep into the question of being, called Heidegger. But there is too much systems. Virtually every philosophical systems, maybe apart from some very ethics-centered systems, most of them can be related with this topic because true and false, existence and non-existence is the core of our understanding of this world. And every epistemology or philosophical systems try to solve them beforehand, going on to anything else. And the reason why I've introduced to you the Zhang Zhou's butterfly dream and the debate upon the Descartes madman is that I believe these two topics are something that is not frequently asked when we think about virtual reality. The dream of the butterfly and his philosophical thought in general, the Zhang Zhou's philosophical thoughts, makes us think about what is meaningful in the question of reality. Does the distinction mean anything? We are so deeply embedded in society. We believe something are very useful, something are not very useful. We think most of the times reading is much more important than playing games. Games are just, well, virtual. Virtual reality is virtual. Metaverse is virtual. You should not delve too deep into them. Live your life. Live reality. But what is reality? If a butterfly dream can be called philosophical, why not the dream of a virtual character not be philosophical? The part about Descartes was, of course, to highlight the fallacies and systems or thoughts that we have about our reality. There are certain axioms in our thoughts or any philosophical thoughts. Why not call ourselves philosophers when we are thinking about these? There are certain axioms that we rarely do question about it, such as, am I not a madman? Of course, there is no answer to it. The question itself is absurd. Absurd is a word frequently used in Foucault's book, The History of Madness. But it is still meaningful, I believe. You cannot answer that. Even though you say, oh, yes, I am a madman, that means nothing. But this highlights a part in our system of thoughts, which is easily ignored. And when we are trying to talk about reality, which is so fundamental in our perceptions, and we are going to talk about virtual things in this about these fundamental things, then we need to think about some more fallacies that might happen, that might be hidden in our system of thoughts, just like the madman of Descartes. Descartes just dismissed the madman by saying, but they are mad. And I will be not less so if I were to follow such examples. But are we? So basically, my focus of presentation was to highlight some parts that I thought that was very influential to myself when I was venturing into philosophy. And there is no answer regarding this question, as I have briefly said when I spoke about philosophy. At least I think so. Some philosophers, faculty of philosophers would say, oh no, what I believe in is true. Yet still, I think there is no answer to these questions, no plausible answers to these questions. And there is no need to answer them, but we need to think about them. That is why I have made this presentation in this form.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. So I've learned a lot from this presentation. I particularly like the introduction of Eastern as opposed to Western philosophy. That was an important part of your presentation. And regarding the question of reality, right, you emphasized the importance of perception. So there's the famous, for example, Russell teapot. Bertrand Russell posited that there's a teapot orbiting the sun. Can you argue for or against that? Does that teapot really exist, or does it not exist? Does the moon exist even if nobody looks at the moon, even if nobody perceives the moon? These are intrinsic questions of existence, of reality. When we dream, the things we dream, are they real or are they less real? Virtual reality, is that a different kind of reality than real reality? And if so, in what sense is it different? And you brought us the story of the butterfly dreaming to be a person, or a person dreaming to be a butterfly. That's a very good thought experiment. So in science and in natural science, there's the implicit assumption that we all live in the same reality. But why is that? Is that really true? Is there some justification? Maybe we just perceive different realities. So if I say I see something is blue, and you look at something and perceive it as blue, is it the same blue? What if a blind person, can a blind person perceive what is blue? Can it understand what it means to be blue? In physics, these questions come really deeply. And for example, electron. Do electrons really exist? Nobody has ever seen an electron. And even worse, photons, the particles of light, they cannot even be seen. If they are seen, then they're immediately destroyed, because seeing them destroys them. So the question of what exists, what is reality, is a very deep question if you start to think about it. And that's what, so for example, Socrates was famous or infamous for asking questions to his fellow citizens that kind of challenged their perception to think about it really deeply, and then become very uncertain of what used to be certain, such as, for example, does God exist? Does something infinite exist? Do we exist? Are we different? There's a philosophy that we're all one, right? So maybe we're all one, then what's the point of distinguishing between us? Right. So yes, this was the first presentation, and thank you very much, Kang Dok-hyun, for going ahead. The first one is always the hardest, right? Now your other participants have the benefit of having a first example, right? First example presentation, which does not mean at all that you should follow the same principle or build up. Please make your own presentation in your own way, as Kang Dok-hyun did in his own way. Time is running short. I would like to briefly discuss maybe, right, first about questions, and then I'd like you to give some feedback about the presentation, not about the content, but about some things that you liked, how Kang Dok-hyun presented these topics, and some way that maybe he could have improved if there is something as feedback and as lesson, and something that also future presenters could take into account. So yes, let's first spend a few minutes to have some discussion and questions. Anybody has questions or comments about the content? No questions? No comments? Come on. Yes.
First of all, I really like the presentation.
Sorry,
you.
no. I have to interrupt here. Assessment we will do after that. First, let's talk about questions or comments about the content. Okay, thank you.
Okay. I think the existence is like the cognitive thing. So I strongly agree with the Descartes statement. So I think it is the think of my mind is like context of in our computer machines. So to discuss which one is reality, so it is very hard to think if we are stuck in like virtual machine, because inside of virtual machine the context could not ever exist in the machine. So but so I think our thinking could not escape from our cognitive area. So maybe Descartes think those of limitation or unexpectation of our minds is the God. So in summary, I'm curious why Descartes came out the God from his the logic flow, because I feel it is very unnecessary part. Could you answer it?
And precisely which part are you saying that it is unnecessary?
In the Descartes slide, you showed the structure of meditation, and the Descartes showed the skepticism of prior perception, and then he said cognitive is remaining, and then he said undeniable existence of God. But I think I think the God is very unnecessary, the statement, because we don't know there is God. It is just, I think it is just unknown. Yeah.
So
why he did?
Yeah. So I am not very deeply knowledgeable about theology, but when you say something infinite in the theological view, you are saying infinite in everything. Infinite in every good things. Of course, being bad is, in Descartes' view, a defect. So I do not know why he is religious, of course, but to make an argument for Descartes regarding this God part, although I also did not like it, he thinks that there are parts of thoughts that is impossible to be came out naturally. If there was no other being that gave me the thought. So if I was alone existing, can I think that I am imperfect? Is it possible to say, oh, I am imperfect? I cannot do mathematics very well, or my mind can be flawed, things like this. Can I think of these when there is no perception of more greater thing, more perfect thing? In this way, Descartes argues that there must be something more than us. There must be something infinitely better than us, which gave us the idea of such betterness, and that is God.
So the main point is Descartes believed the perfect thing, there is perfect thing, and that is God. So
Yes.
the God shows our path, and those are logic. That is God, Descartes thing, right? Kind of, yeah.
So I do not know if Descartes would specifically think that logic is a path made by God, but he does think that he frequently mentions in his meditations that these are gifts given by God. So in some way, of course, he would think that his own thinkings, his meditations, is possible because he is bestowed by God. So in some way, I think you are correct.
Okay, I would now like to cut short the discussion of the content of the presentation and move on to the evaluation, the feedback, the quality. What did you like, and what do you have suggestions for possible improvement? Okay, maybe Kang Dok-kyung, would you like to have a final word before I wrap up?
Final word?
Just one or two final sentences.
Yes, I knew that this might be some textful, but I personally do not like colorized text, so I'll keep that in mind for your feedbacks regarding the part. And about the content of free will, I excluded some part that seems to be related with the next topic, that is the, what was it, simulation hypothesis. I believe the question regarding free wills might be addressed in that part as well. Of course, there are a bunch of philosophers who is both contemporary and ancient regarding free wills, and if there are some that might make meaningful questions, that might be also great for another presenter to present about it.
Great, thank you. So time is already up. Have you all watched the recommended movies? Have you done your homework? Please raise your hand if you have watched all the movies. Raise your virtual hand now. So it seems some have not yet watched the recommended movies for the first part on virtual reality.
I haven't watched one.
Okay, good. You still have time until
Yeah.
presentation on Thursday. Yes, everybody, please. This is something you should enjoy. This is not something you should force yourself to on the last minute or the last night to binge watch all the movies. The purpose of these movies is really to make you question your perception of reality and virtual reality. Okay, so that's all for today. Thank you very much for tuning in, for joining. Once again, thank you very much, Kang Dok-kyung, for your presentation. And we'll meet again virtually online on Thursday with a presentation by, yes, okay, on simulation hypothesis. Good, that's all for today. See you.
Thank you.